Goodreads is Amazon's popular book review social media platform with over 90 million members. I definitely think the website has its issues. In fact, I've done a video about exactly that before, but ultimately it is a pretty useful tool for finding your next read and seeing what other people are saying. Every year, Goodreads has its own awards ceremony called the Goodreads Choice Awards, and the process has been met with lots of debate. Ultimately, it is like most other awards processes in that it comes down to being a bit of a popularity contest. Readers will vote for their favourite books by their favourite authors in all genres, and some authors will push harder than others to make the cut. Some authors may even get a little bit more upset than others if they don't.
Oh my god.
The winners are announced on the 9th of December, but before then I wanted to see what horror books were really getting people talking. A few that interested me were Comfort Me with Apples by Catherine M. Vellante, My Heart is a Chainsaw by the fantastic Stephen Graham Jones, and Chasing the Boogeyman by Richard Chizmar, but my attention was mostly grabbed by a book called The Hollows by Mark Edwards. What's shakin'? My name's Cam, welcome back to another video. I make weekly videos doing deep dives and discussions on various horror and fantasy books, so if that's your kind of thing, I would love it if you stuck around. Today is another Wheel of Time video, baby, here we go. No, I'm just kidding. We are less than 2 weeks away from the winners of the Goodreads Choice Awards being announced, and before they are, I wanted to read some of the nominees for myself. Mark Edwards is a UK-born author specialising in mystery and thrillers with an explicitly psychological focus. His most popular book, and one that you've likely heard of, is called Follow You Home, a chilling story about a pair of people lost in the forest far from civilization. I want to start this video by saying that I think Mark seems like a really cool guy. He seems to be super active when interacting with his readers, and he always seems genuinely passionate about the stories that he's putting out. Plus, look at his author photo. Tell me that doesn't look like a guy who would offer to help you move house without you even asking him. With all that said, I did read his latest book, The Hollows, which has been nominated for the Goodreads Choice Award in the horror genre. Although personally, I feel like this story is much more explicitly a thriller, and there is a difference. I do want to tell you how I felt about this story, the good and the bad, but before I do, let me give you a spoiler-free recap of the story itself so that we're on the same page. Oh, the same page. The story starts with Tom and his young daughter Frankie going on a vacation to a beautiful cabin resort in the woods. This isn't your typical solitary cabin surrounded by gnarled trees and miles of isolation and shadow. This one's a lot more bright and welcoming. It's much more like a summer camp. It's alive and vibrant with tourists and locals. See, Tom isn't as close with Frankie as he'd like. His career as a journalist is spiraling the drain, and Frankie's mum has moved her to the other side of the planet. Tom's efforts to connect with his daughter end up being undercut by something he wasn't aware of when he booked the vacation. The Hollows is a popular destination spot, but for a subset of people known as dark tourists. They're coming to see for themselves the place where a grisly double homicide took place 20 years ago. Among the other campers, Tom and Frankie meet a couple, well known as popular true crime podcasters, and their son. As the days pass, Tom tries harder and harder to reforge a bond with Frankie. Strange things begin to happen, and the two of them are forced to start questioning not just the resort hosts, but also the other tourists and the Hollows itself. I've always really loved the trope, especially within horror, of a character whose life is rapidly going downhill. You know, failed marriage, failed career, all the benchmarks of a truly uplifting story. Right? I mean, hell, that was the central plot point of my own psychological horror book, Welcome Descent. Look, give me a break, guys. I have to plug this thing at least every now and then. I find that this trope not only makes the characters more relatable and sympathetic, but it also makes the fracturing of their mental state all the more believable. Who is worse suited to handle a terrifying murder mystery than someone who is already dealing with their world falling apart? What would the stress of a situation like this do to a man who feels like he's losing one of the last people he has left? His daughter. Well, it would probably break him. And that's the beauty of the story. The tricky relationship between a father and a daughter is a tale as old as time. And in The Hollows, it actually ends up playing perfectly into the mystery itself. Tom struggles with the conflict of protecting his daughter and keeping her safe, while also trying not to smother her or burden her with his failures, and all of that becomes a lot more difficult when you add into the mix a potential serial killer. Meanwhile, Frankie, the daughter, is trying to make sense of the weird things that are happening in the woods, while also cherishing the little time that she gets to spend with her dad. It's really sweet, and sometimes pretty tragic to read, but it did really help me to feel for and empathize with these characters. I should mention at this point that the way I normally consume books is either as an ebook, an audiobook, or sometimes both. I don't really buy many physical copies of books anymore because I live in Australia and I would like to be able to pay my rent. The reason I'm telling you that is because I do try to keep even my most constructive criticism, my most critical criticism, as nice as possible. But I have to say, I have to tell you that the narration for this audiobook of The Hollows was so bad, oh my god. The narrator, Guy Mott, has a perfectly fine voice. He's fine as a narrator, I just don't think he's suited to read horror fiction. There was just this weird kind of almost corporate voice reading the story to you. It kind of sounds like the narration for a top 10 YouTube video. I don't know, like an iPhone commercial. And also, on kind of a weird note, sometimes, not always, but sometimes he did the voice for Frankie, who was a 14-year-old girl. He put on this kind of voice that ended up sounding a lot like Larry David. I'm not kidding. All I'll say is, if you are interested in reading The Hollows, you may be best off sticking with the actual text version. While I'm pointing out the things that I didn't really like about this book, I may as well mention that there were sections of dialogue that felt a bit out of touch. Not in like a sinister or malicious way, just in a... how do I put it? Let's call it a Riverdale way. Meaning at times it felt a lot like an adult trying to guess what a kid thinks is cool and kind of missing the mark. Now, obviously, I'm no Gen Z. I think technically I'm not even allowed to refer to myself as a youngster anymore, which is, I mean, it's kind of sad, because I'm a millennial. But I think I'm at least partly plugged into the social zeitgeist enough to know that there were lines of dialogue in this book that felt pretty unnatural, even for a kid. And there were enough pop culture references that it did end up becoming a bit distracting. I love it in books when the author references a song, like they'll name a specific song that's playing on the radio during a scene or something like that. I love that, but I find when it comes to other stuff, you really do have to be a bit more subtle. The general vibe that I was getting at some points in the story was that Mark might have googled Gen Z slang and then just thrown it all together. Let's be clear, there are kids that do talk like that.
Gotta.
Huh.
Sometimes you...
Yeah, no facts, Cap.
But they also suck. They suck. I'll give you some examples. In the first half of the book, these are some of the references that are kind of squeezed into conversation or internal monologues. TikTok, OK Boomer, Fortnite, spilling the tea, being cringe AF, and the line, yes I'm serious, OMG, who dat? Frankie got a new boo, LOL. I don't know. Maybe kids do talk like that.
Am I so out of touch? No, it's the children who are wrong.
I think the important thing to know going into this is that it is a thriller. I wouldn't really call it a horror. That's not a bad thing. By any stretch, thrillers are perfectly fine, and in fact, in a lot of cases, they're a lot harder to write than horror. I'm just saying, for anyone who might find this book in the horror nominees for the Goodreads Choice Awards, they may end up reading something they didn't really expect. Horror and thriller can certainly overlap, they can intertwine with each other, but in the case of The Hollows, you're looking at a slow burn story that focuses on building suspense and mystery rather than gore and terror. I'm not going to give you any spoilers, of course, but I will say that the end of this story was by far the strongest part of the book. I would say like the last maybe quarter or third of the book. Some people may say that the twist is a bit predictable, but honestly I think most people will still be surprised. Mark did one of the best things that you can possibly do for a thriller story. He laid solid groundwork in small facts or story moments that ended up coming back later as a payoff. In the climax, the Hollows will have you wondering who in this resort can be trusted, or if anyone there is at all who they seem. This is a perfectly fine thriller book, but I don't think it should win Best Horror of the Year. I do think it's worth a read if that's the type of stuff you're into, as long as you're not planning on going on vacation anytime soon. Speaking of which, I have a short story in the vacation-themed horror short story anthology, We Are Not Home. All of the profits go to charity and you can find it on Amazon. Yeah, I know, 2 plugs in one video, I'm sorry. As always, thanks for watching guys, especially for watching through the whole video. You know, you guys that watch the whole video, you might think I don't notice, but I do, and it makes you my favorite. If you like videos doing deep dives and discussions on various fantasy and horror books, then I would love it if you stuck around. I'd love to see you in the comments section or maybe in the next video. Tell you what, before you go, why don't you go down to the comments and let me know what your Goodreads nominees are, or your nominations for winners in various genres are for this year's Goodreads Choice Awards. Is there a horror that you think should be winning Best Horror of the Year? Let me know. It could very well end up being the next book I read. Thanks again for watching guys, see you in the next one. Catch ya.